Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this is coming across okay. I'd like to welcome you to this quite special event, an event which I think is particularly poignant, being held today on the 11th of November. And with that in mind, I would like to ask Martin Uden, who is the president of the British Korean War Veterans Association, to kick off the proceedings. Martin.
Thank you, Tony. I'm going to try and keep us as close to 11 as we can. I think we may be a few seconds past, so forgive us. But although 11 a.m. on 11 November has been adopted as a particularly special moment to remember those who lost their lives in wars since the First World War, it has also been adopted as an appropriate moment for veterans of the Korean War to remember their comrades who made the ultimate sacrifice. Starting in Canada, this has become known as Turn Toward Busan, as a reminder of the UN cemetery where servicemen from the various UN states are interred. For us, this is going to mean you're going to have to do something. It would mean turning to the east, which is that away, which means that away. So I invite you to stand and face that way as a mark of respect as we turn toward Busan. Thank you. Thank you. Please be seated. I have no idea how long that was, but it was roughly a minute. I think we're good enough. Tony, crack on? Crack on. Now, I'm truly grateful to Tony Bard for organising this remarkable occasion and honoured to be asked to make a few opening remarks. And I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and allowing us to mark together this turn toward Busan on 11 November. I know this means a lot to British veterans of the Korean War. I'd like to offer some thoughts about the war from various perspectives, but appropriately, I hope, I'll start with postal matters. I've recently been reading Remembered with Advantage by Digby Grist. Grist was a major in the Gloucesters during the Korean War and was second in command of the 1st Battalion. As such, his role was behind the front lines, and he recalled that just before the major battle of the Imjin, which was so devastating for his regiment, he would shuttle between the front line and his own base. He says, "From Sault Marie, it was a short run into battalion headquarters, and woe betide us if we hadn't brought the mail." "What do you come for then?" would be the cry. But there usually was mail. Among the unsung heroes of Korea are the Army Field Post Office. Now, you would think that the post office staff would be unlikely to perish in the war, but sadly, Private Joseph Pratt of the British Army Post Office did pass away in January 1953 and is buried in the UN cemetery in Busan. He was 33 and died of natural causes, although an autopsy was unable to state precisely what he died of. But let me talk a little about the experience of British forces in the Korean War. I realise I might be crossing into the territory of some of subsequent speakers today, but if I do, I'm sure that whatever I say bears repetition anyway. And I have to preface this, in this lovely document that you've got here, there are some other figures about casualties. Nothing new there. They are all, don't believe a word of it. Anyway, well, I can talk at length about numbers in fall and all that. But anyway, the official figures are that about 80,000 British servicemen took part in the Korean War. And officially, 1,078 of them died in the war. A similar number, 1,060, were prisoners of war, and there were over 2,600 wounded. The bulk of the servicemen were doing their national service. And that category of men couldn't serve in a war zone until they were 19, although a distressing number of the fatalities were aged just 19. While the figures of 80,000 deployed and over 1,000 killed are very significant in UK terms, please do remember that the figures for the US forces were over 1.75 million deployed and 36,500 killed. The overwhelming experience of the British national servicemen was that their duty and career was almost immediately forgotten back in the UK. I shan't go into the reasons for this, but the genuineness of their perception has to be appreciated. There was some saving grace to the oblivion into which their sacrifices seemed to descend, and this was the determination of the Korean government and people not to forget their debt to the foreign servicemen who came to their aid. Revisits for veterans to Korea started in 1975 for US servicemen, and the first party of British veterans took part in a revisit in 1981, when I was working in the British Embassy in Seoul and had the good fortune to meet that group of veterans. All these visits have been massively subsidized by the Korean authorities, meaning that there have had to be restrictions on the number of times eager veterans can return. But I've always found that the men who take part find the whole experience uplifting, even if highly emotional at times. Those revisits have continued to this day, albeit with dwindling numbers. Indeed, I saw on Facebook this morning the ceremonies at the cemetery, which had some British participation there from veterans. But for me, a particular year to remember was 2010, when the group of visiting veterans was stranded by the eruption of the Icelandic volcano in April that year. While accommodation was quickly found for the veterans in an airport hotel, we in the embassy had to ensure that they were properly fed, making dozens of British-style sandwiches from bread donated by the local Tesco's, and we even arranged what we hoped was a morale-boosting visit by Sir John Major, the former Prime Minister, who was similarly stranded in Seoul at the time. If I remember, he managed to get back via New York, and I think he was hoping to take the Queen Mary 2 across there. Bless him. Veterans had to wait a bit longer, but they did get back. I should say that my wife and I consistently found that looking after the veterans on these revisits was honestly the highlight of our diplomatic year. Of course, there were some difficult characters at times, but for the most part, they were a fascinating cross-section of British society of the early 1950s, who were always surprised and delighted to find how deeply their contribution to freedom on the Korean peninsula was appreciated by the Korean people, no matter how many years had elapsed since the war. It was because of this experience that I've been lucky enough to do a little for the surviving veterans after my retirement from the Foreign Office. The natural passage of time means there are fewer and fewer of them left, and even fewer who are still active and mobile. But it has been encouraging in recent years that their service has featured in the annual service of remembrance at the Albert Hall, organised by the Royal British Legion, and indeed that His Majesty the King invited all surviving veterans to a reception at Buckingham Palace in March last year. His Majesty was at that time still too ill to attend the reception, but he saw a small number of the veterans privately and was ably represented by the Princess Royal and the Duchess of Edinburgh at the reception. I should also mention how important it has been for the veterans to be able to meet and support each other. The British Korean Veterans Association was formed back in the 1970s and played an important role in the revisit programme, but also had a nationwide network of branches which very many veterans found enormously supportive. The association decided to disband, and in 2015 it laid up its colours in York Minster. Some veterans, however, felt they should keep their sense of camaraderie alive, and so instituted the British Korean War Veterans Association, and it is this association which kindly asked me to be its national president. I hope these few remarks have served to show how important it has been for the veterans to have their contribution and the sacrifice made by 1,078 of their fallen comrades appropriately recognised, whether by the Korean government or the royal family. Simply holding this event and remembering the UK's involvement in the Korean War in itself goes some way to show to veterans that they are not completely forgotten. Many thanks. Thank you.